You told them I could not manage my own medication. You wrote that down and you put your name under it. Look at me, Bethany. You are standing in the kitchen where you got married. You told them I could not name the month. I want you to say it to my face. One time, out loud, the way you wrote it down. She did not blink. She said, "You were on the bathroom floor in February, and you did not know where you were, and I am the one who found you." And I said, "Yes, that happened. That was one night. You turned one night into 14. My name is Corinne Threadgill. I am 68 years old, and I live outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on the same road I have lived on for 41 years. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. I like knowing where you are sitting when you hear this. And please stay with me until the end, because the part that matters is not what happened in my kitchen that day. The part that matters comes later, and it is the part nobody warns you about. For 30 years, I ran health information management at a regional hospital. That is a fancy way of saying I was in charge of the record. Every chart, every note, every signature, every time somebody opened a file they had no business opening. If a doctor wrote something in the wrong patient's chart on a Tuesday night, I was the one who found it Wednesday morning and made somebody fix it. I retired in June of 2022 after a sheet cake in the break room and a card every sign. I fired 2 people in those 30 years for altering documentation. One of them was a woman named Junie, who I had eaten lunch with twice a week for 11 years. She backdated a nursing note to cover a late med pass, and she cried in my office, and I walked her out anyway. My husband asked me that night how I could do that to a friend, and I told him the record is the only thing in a hospital that cannot speak up for itself. Somebody has to be a bastard about it. It might as well be somebody who understands what it costs. I have thought about that conversation about 900 times since. My husband is Wendell. We got married in 1981, which means we have been at this longer than most of the people watching have been alive. He put in heating and air for 38 years, and he was captain of the volunteer fire department out in Cannon County for 19 of them. He is the kind of man who still gets up when a woman comes in a room. He is also the kind of man who does not say a whole lot, and when he does say something, you had better sit down for it. We have 2 kids. Bridget is the older one. She supervises the 911 dispatch center for the county, which tells you everything about her. Bridget has spent her whole adult life listening to people have the worst minute of their lives and then telling them calmly what to do next. She does not panic. She does not exaggerate. If Bridget tells you the house is on fire, get out of the house. And we have Trevor. I have started this part 4 different ways, and every one of them came out sounding like an excuse, so I am going to say it plain. Trevor is my son, and I loved him wrong, not less wrong. Every single time that boy hit a wall, I got there before the wall did. For 40 years, I was the softest thing in his life, and I called it being a good mother. We have a farm out in Cannon County. 118 acres my daddy left me when he passed in 2011. There is a ridge on the back of it that catches light in the evening in a way I have never been able to describe to anybody. And there is a 40-acre stretch on the roadside that my father cleared himself in 1968 with a chainsaw and a mule he borrowed from a man named Hollis Renfro. Hold on to that 40 acres. It comes back. Now here is the part I have to tell you honestly, because if I do not, the rest of this does not work. On the 6th of February, 2024, I fell on the ice. I went out to get the mail in house shoes like a damn fool, and my feet went out from under me on the walk, and I landed hard on my hip. Nothing broke. But my back seized up over the next 2 days, and the doctor put me on a muscle relaxer, and something in that pill did not agree with whatever else I was taking. I do not remember the night of the 9th. What I know is what other people told me. I got up around 2 in the morning. I went into the hall bathroom, and I sat down on the floor between the tub and the toilet, and I did not know where I was. Wendell was asleep with his hearing aids out, which is how he sleeps. Bethany found me. Bethany is Trevor's wife. She is a registered nurse, and at that time she was doing care coordination for a home health outfit out of Smyrna. She came by early because she was dropping Hattie off before school, and she came in through the carport door like she always did. And she found her mother-in-law sitting on a bathroom floor at 6 in the morning in a nightgown, unable to tell her what day it was. She did everything right. She was gentle with me. She did not make me feel like a child, which is not a small thing when you are 66 years old and sitting on a floor. She drove me in herself. She stayed. The emergency room note from that morning says the words altered mental status, and it says them because they were accurate. That night was real. Every bit of it was real. Hold on to that too, because it is the hinge of this whole thing. I got better. It was the medication. They took me off it, and inside of 4 days I was back to myself, and by March I had mostly stopped thinking about it, except for a little cold spot in my chest that showed up whenever I could not find my keys. What I did not know was that in that same month, other things started moving. Trevor's excavating company lost a pipeline subcontract in the spring. I found that out much later. He never said a word about it at Sunday dinner. He sat at my table and ate my pot roast and told us business was steady. And that same spring, the sign went up all over Cannon County. Solar land lease, big square signs zip-tied to fence posts with an 800 number on them. A development company was assembling acreage for a utility-scale solar project, and they were driving those county roads, knocking on doors, and the numbers they were saying out loud were numbers people out there had never heard attached to a hayfield in their lives. Odell Pridemore signed. Odell is our neighbor. He is 79 years old. He has 200 acres that run right up against ours along the west fence, and he has been leaving cucumbers on my porch every July since the Reagan administration. He came over and told Wendell about it in the driveway, all lit up, holding the paperwork like a report card. Wendell listened and nodded, and after Odell drove off, he said one sentence to me. He said, "Well, that changes what this place is worth." I said, "It does not change what it is." He said, "No, but it changes what people think about when they look at it." I did not understand yet that my husband had just told me the whole story 8 months before I figured it out. There was one more thing that spring, and I let it go by, and I have not forgiven myself for it. Hattie was 9. She is my granddaughter, and she is the kind of kid who narrates. Nothing stays in that child's head. She was sitting on my counter eating grapes out of the colander before I could wash them, and she said, "Grandma, when we move out to your farm, I get the room with the slanty ceiling." I laughed at her. I said, "Honey, nobody is moving out to the farm. There is not even a working furnace in that house." And she said, "Mommy already picked it." I remember being amused. I remember thinking Bethany had probably been daydreaming out loud, the way people do, the way I have daydreamed about that ridge my whole life. I gave Hattie a paper towel for her hands, and I told her not to eat the ones with the stem still on, and I let it go. A 9-year-old told me exactly what was coming, and I gave her a paper towel. The mail came on the 4th of October. I can be precise about this because I have gone over it in my head so many times that I can tell you what the light was doing. It was a Friday. It was still warm. Wendell was at the shop getting the tires rotated. I brought in the mail and stood at the counter, sorting it into the pile that matters and the pile that goes straight in the trash, and in the middle of it was my Medicare summary notice for the third quarter. I almost did not open it. That is the thing I keep coming back to. I almost put it in the drawer with the others. I opened it, standing up, with my reading glasses pushed on my head and then pulled back down, and I read a line that said skilled nursing visit, and under it another line that said skilled nursing visit, and under that another one, 14 of them, from the 3rd of June to the 22nd of August. All of them billed at my address, all of them under a home health agency operating under a trade name I did not recognize, and every single one of them certified by a physician named Emmett Lockridge. I have never met a doctor named Emmett Lockridge in my life. I stood in my kitchen with that piece of paper in both hands, and here is what people get wrong when they imagine this happening to them. I was not angry, I was scared. For about 5 seconds, standing at my own counter, in my own house, at 66 years old, I looked at 14 nursing visits to my home, and the first thought that came into my head was, what if I do not remember? That is what they do to you. Before anybody takes anything, before there is a lawyer or a courtroom or a stranger in your driveway, they get 5 seconds inside your head where you have to ask yourself if you are still all the way there. And I had been on that bathroom floor in February. I knew what that felt like. I knew it was possible. So before I called anybody, I sat down at the kitchen table and I proved it to myself. I got out my wall calendar. I got out the credit card statements. I got out the sign-in sheet from the continuing education class I taught in Cookville on the 11th of July, which is 62 miles from my kitchen, and which has my signature at the top of it and 41 other signatures under mine. According to that piece of paper from Medicare, a nurse was standing in my living room that morning, taking my blood pressure. I sat there a long time with the calendar in front of me and my hands flat on the table. Then I got up and got a legal pad out of the desk drawer, and I wrote the date at the top, and I started the log. 30 years I made sure the record told the truth about other people. That Friday afternoon, I started keeping one for myself. If a notice showed up in your mailbox billing, Medicare for 14 nursing visits to your house that never happened, what would you do first? Would you call the number printed on the paper, or would you sit down and start writing everything down? Tell me in the comments before you hear what I did. I did not call anybody for 3 days. That sounds strange, so let me explain. I did not call the 800 number on the notice, and I did not call the home health agency, and I did not call my son. I sat at that kitchen table until the light went orange on the wall, and I made a list of what I needed and what order I needed it in. 30 years in that job teaches you one thing above everything else. Whoever moves first without documentation loses. I had watched attorneys eat hospital administrators alive because somebody sent an angry email at 9 at night. I was not going to be that. So on Monday the 7th, I drove into town and mailed 2 letters, certified, return receipt requested. The first was a written request for access to my complete designated record set, not a summary. Every document that agency held under my name, including the assessments, the plan of care, the physician orders, the visit notes, and the intake documentation. I used the exact language because I spent a decade teaching other people how to answer letters like the one I was writing. The second was a request for an accounting of disclosures. That one is the letter nobody knows exists. Under federal law, you can make an entity tell you who they gave your information to and when. Most people go their whole lives without ever hearing about it. I wanted to know where my chart had been. Then I bought a hardbound composition notebook at the drugstore, the kind with the marbled cover that a child takes to school, because a hardbound notebook cannot have pages torn out of it without it showing. I wrote the date on the first line. I wrote down what I mailed when I mailed it and the tracking numbers. I photographed every page of everything I touched from then on. Wendell watched all of this from the doorway with his coffee, and on the third night he set the cup down harder than he needed to and said, "Corinne, what in the hell are we doing?" I said, "We are building a file." He said, "No, you are building a file. I want to get in the truck and drive out there and ask that boy to his face what he has done." And I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" And I gave him the honest answer, which was worse than a lie would have been. I said, "Because if I go out there and I get loud, somebody will write it down." He did not follow me at first. So I laid it out. I said, "Whatever is happening here started with a medical record. That means somewhere there is a file with my name on it that says something about my mind. And the fastest way to make that file look right is for me to show up somewhere shaking and accusing people of things. A 66-year-old woman standing in a driveway hollering about a conspiracy is not a woman defending herself. She is a symptom. They do not need me to be wrong. They just need me to be upset in front of a witness." Wendell stood there a minute. Then he said the thing that stayed with me longer than almost anything anybody said to me that whole year. He said, "You have been managing that boy so long you forgot how to just be mad at somebody." I told him to go to bed. He slept in the spare room for 3 nights. 43 years of marriage, and I could count on one hand the times that had happened. What made it worse was that he was not wrong, and we both knew it. And neither of us was willing to say so out loud, so we moved around each other in that house like 2 people sharing a hallway in a nursing home. He came back to bed on the 4th night without a word about it. That is how he does. But something was sitting in the middle of the room from then on, and it did not leave. Now I have to tell you about the 11 days I wasted. I was so sure I knew what this was: medical identity theft. It is real, it is common as dirt, and it is boring. Somebody gets your Medicare number, They bill for services you never got. They take the money. They move on to the next name on the list. It happens to hundreds of thousands of people. It had nothing to do with my family. It was just a number on a card, so I did the whole routine. Froze my credit at all three bureaus. Filed a report with the Federal Trade Commission. Called the Medicare fraud line and sat on hold for 51 minutes and talked to a young man who was perfectly polite and told me my complaint was received and given a reference number. Requested my full claims history, called my supplemental carrier. 11 days. And in every one of those calls, I was building a story in my head where this was a stranger, some outfit in another state running a scam, and once the government caught up to them, it would be over and I could go back to my life. I wanted that so bad, because here is what I had already noticed and had not let myself look at directly. The visits were billed to my home address, my actual physical address out on that county road, not a post office box. Whoever was writing those notes was writing them about a house they had been inside of. I let that sit there for 11 days without picking it up. In the middle of all this, Bethany came by with soup. I am going to describe this the way it actually happened, and not the way I see it now, because those are two different scenes. It was a Thursday afternoon. She came in through the carport door with a Dutch oven wrapped in a dish towel, chicken and rice, and she set it on my stove and put the lid back the way I like it. She had come from a shift and still had her badge clipped to her scrub top. She had cut her hair shorter, and I told her it suited her. She sat down at my kitchen table and asked how I was sleeping. Then she asked if I had been taking my blood pressure medicine regular, or if I was still doing that thing where I skip it when I feel fine. Then she asked if I had been dizzy at all lately. Then she said, "Hey, Quiz, what day is it?" She said it laughing. She said it the way you would say it to somebody who had just come off a night shift, teasing. I laughed too. I said it is Thursday, and I know it is Thursday because Wendell has his hearing aid appointment, and he has been complaining about it since Monday. And she laughed and said, okay, you passed. I sat at my own kitchen table and let a woman quiz me on the day of the week, and I thought it was affection. That is the part that took the longest to get over. Not the courtroom, not the money. That Thursday, she stayed 45 minutes. She washed my dishes before she left. She asked whether Wendell had ever gotten that back railing fixed on the deck. She hugged me at the door and told me to eat the soup while it was hot and not to freeze half of it like I always do. I froze half of it. The records came on the 22nd of October. A padded envelope, 140 pages. So ordinary looking that I set it on the counter and made coffee before I opened it. Then I sat down and read it the way I used to read charts on Wednesday mornings. That is the difference. A patient reads their own record looking for their name and their diagnosis, and whether the doctor said anything mean about them. I did not read it like a patient. I read it like a records director doing a documentation audit, and if you have ever done that work, you know it is not really reading. It is pattern matching. You are not looking at what the note says. You are looking at what the note is. It took me about 20 minutes to find the first one. 2 visit notes 3 weeks apart, and the review of systems section was identical. Not dentical, comma for comma. Same phrasing, same order, same 2 words in the wrong sequence in the third line, which is the tell, because a typo does not reproduce itself in a new note unless somebody copied and pasted the old one. I sat back in my chair. Then I found the second one, and the second one made my ears ring. The assessment documented decreased range of motion and chronic pain in my left knee. Left knee. Consistent findings described across multiple visits with an intervention plan built around it. I had my right knee replaced in 2019. Right. There is titanium in it. There is a scar on it you can see from across a room. There is nothing wrong with my left knee, and there never has been. Nobody who had actually laid hands on me could have written that. Nobody who had been in the same room as my legs could have written that. The third thing was the medication list, and by then I already knew. The assessment listed a drug I have never in my life been prescribed, and it was missing 2 that I take every single morning and have taken for 9 years. And on that same form, in the section that scores functional status, somebody had marked that I was not able to manage my own medications independently. Think about that. The document that says I cannot handle my pills, cannot get my pills right. Then I went looking for Emmett Lockridge. He was real. 63 years old, licensed in Tennessee, in good standing, working under contract with the agency, signing off on plans of care. And there was not one single note anywhere in 140 pages documenting a face-to-face encounter between that man and me. Let me explain why that matters, and I will keep it short. For Medicare to pay for home health, a doctor has to certify you need it. And that certification is not valid unless the doctor or a nurse practitioner working with him actually saw you in person inside a specific window around the start of care, documented that encounter, and tied the reason for home health to what he found when he saw you. No face-to-face encounter, no valid certification. Not a technicality, the whole thing is built on it. There was no encounter, there was no note, there was a signature on a plan of care for a woman he had never been in a room with. I called the agency the next morning and asked for medical records, and a young woman named Tandy Barlow picked up. I was careful. I did not accuse anybody. I said I was reviewing my file and had a question about the visit documentation. And I read her 4 dates, and I asked which clinician was assigned to my case. And Tandy, who was 31 years old and had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, read it right off her screen in the same voice you would use to tell somebody their prescription was ready. She said that would be Bethany Threadgill, RN. She is listed as your primary on all 14. I said, thank you. I remember saying thank you. I said it twice. I was raised to be polite, and apparently it goes all the way to the bone, because I thanked that girl for telling me my son's wife had written me sick. Then I asked one more question, slow, because I already knew and I wanted to hear it out loud. I asked what the qualifying event was, what the referral was based on. And Tandy said, looks like an ER visit, ma'am, February 9th, the night I was on the bathroom floor, the night she found me. I sat down on the kitchen stool and something else came to me, and it was the professional in me, not the mother. Every home health agency in this country has a policy against a clinician treating her own family. Conflict of interest. It is the first page of the employee handbook. I know because I wrote that section for 2 different organizations. She had assigned herself to her own mother-in-law, and nobody at that agency had caught it because nobody at that agency was looking, because the 2 of us have the same last name, and it never crossed one desk that thought to ask. She did not steal my identity. She did not make me up out of nothing. She took the one true thing that had ever happened to me like that, the one night I really was gone, and she watered it. Here is what I want to ask you. If the person who wrote it down was somebody you had fed at your own table for 11 years, somebody who had sat with your grandchildren and washed your dishes, would you have called the police that night? Or would you have done what I did, which was sit in a dark kitchen until midnight, trying to think of one other explanation? I want to hear it. I did not call my son. It was not strategy and it was not strength. I did not call Trevor because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. He would say something that sounded like an explanation, and I would take it. I have never once in 40 years gotten off the phone with that boy holding my ground, so I did not give myself the chance. I called Bridget on Saturday morning and said, "Are you home?" And she said, "What happened?" "That is my daughter," 4 words in, and she already knew. I drove over there by myself. Wendell offered and I told him no, and he did not argue, which I think means he understood this was a thing between me and her. Bridget lives in a brick ranch off Halls Hill Pike with a yard Boyd keeps like a golf course. She met me at the door and did not say hello. She looked at my face and stepped back and said, "Get in here." Joss was at the kitchen table with a history book open in front of him. 13 years old, all elbows. Bridget said, "Honey, take that upstairs." And he looked at me for a second, longer than a child usually looks at a grandmother, and then he picked up the book and went. He did not ask one question. I have wondered since how much he understood from my face alone. I put the whole thing on the table, the Medicare notice, the 140 pages, the composition notebook, the knee, the medication list, Tandy Barlow saying Bethany's name like it was the weather. Bridget read for 11 minutes without saying one word. She reads the way she works. She was not reacting. She was intaking. When she finished, she squared the pages up and set them down, and she did not say, "I told you so." I want that on the record. She had every right in the world to say it, and she has never said it, not that day and not since. What she said was, "How many times have you paid for him, Mama?" I said, "What?" She said, "Not helped." "I know how many times you helped. I want to know how many times you paid." And she sat there and waited. I could have gotten out of it. I could have said, "I do not know," or "a few," or "what does it matter now?" She would have let me. That is the thing about Bridget. She asks, and then she leaves the door open and lets you decide what kind of person you are going to be in front of her. I told her three. The first was 2004. Trevor was 18. He was helping with the volunteer fire department fundraiser out in Cannon County, the barbecue plate sale they did every fall, and he was one of the kids running the cash box. 900 and some dollars came up short. I put it back. I drove to the bank on a Thursday and took out cash and put it in an envelope and gave it to the treasurer, a man named Perry Slate, and told him I had recounted and found a mistake in the deposit, and I was so sorry for the confusion. Perry looked at me about 2 seconds too long and then said, "Well, all right, Corinne. That was Wendell's fire department, my husband's. He was captain that year. He wore the badge. If that had come out the way it should have, he would have had to stand in front of a room of men he had known since high school and account for his own son. I decided he did not have to. I made that decision by myself in a bank parking lot, and I never told him, and he still does not know. The second was 2013. Trevor had the excavating company by then. A customer's deposit got used for something it should not have been used for. He called it a cash flow issue. I have since learned that is what people call it when there is a hole where somebody else's money used to be. I took $9,400 out of my retirement account. I took the penalty. I paid the taxes on it the next April and did not say a word. And I told Wendell we were re-roofing the shed. We never re-roofed the shed. That shed still has the same roof on it. I have looked at that roof for 11 years. The third was 2019. Trevor got picked up for driving under the influence out on the 70. And I called a man named Doyle Ferreter who had sat on the hospital board for 14 years and who I had personally saved from a records problem that would have ended his career, and I asked him if there was anybody he could talk to. Nothing happened. Doyle was polite and vague, and I could hear in his voice that I had just spent something I could not get back for absolutely nothing. Trevor went through the system like anybody else, got the diversion program, did the classes. But I called. That is the part I had to say out loud in my daughter's kitchen. It does not matter that nothing came of it. I picked up a phone and tried to buy my grown son out of a consequence, and the only reason it did not work is that I did not have enough to spend. Bridget did not flinch at any of it. When I finished, she said, "Okay, now I know what we are working with, that is all, no lecture." She got up and refilled my coffee, and I sat there feeling like somebody had taken a coat off me that I had been wearing since 1986. Boyd had been at the sink the whole time with his back to us, not pretending very hard to be washing anything. He is a welder, big quiet man, forearms like a brick. He turned around and dried his hands and said, "Corinne." I said, "Yes." He said, "We are going to help you, whatever it takes." And then he said, "And I need you to hear the second part. We are not going bankrupt for him. I have got 2 kids and a mortgage, and I will give you every dollar I have to fight what has been done to you. But I will not give 1 cent to make Trevor's life easier on the other side of it. I need you to hear the difference between those 2 things, right now, today, before this gets going." I said, "I hear it." He said, "Do you?" I said, "Boyd, I have spent 40 years not hearing it." "I hear it." He nodded once and went back to the sink. 4 days later, they came to my house. Monday, the 28th of October, about 10 in the morning. 2 vehicles in my driveway, Trevor's truck and behind it a gray sedan I did not know. The man who got out of the sedan was in his 60s. Gray hair, tan sport coat, no tie, leather folder under his arm. He came up my walk at a normal speed and knocked instead of ringing the bell, and when I opened the door, he said, "Good morning, ma'am," and asked if he could come in and speak with me. His name was Roy Alden Vestal. I have thought a lot about how to describe him, and the honest answer is there is nothing to describe. He was a professional fiduciary. He had done this several hundred times. He was courteous. He said ma'am in every third sentence. He was not cruel to me at any point, and that is precisely the thing that matters. He laid a document on my kitchen table and turned it around so it was facing me, which is a small kindness, and I noticed it. It was an order from the Chancery Court appointing him temporary fiduciary over my property and financial affairs, effective immediately for 60 days pending a hearing. He explained what it meant, twice. He explained it slowly the second time without me asking him to, which is something you learn to do when you have watched a lot of people not absorb information the first time. It meant he controlled the accounts. It meant he controlled the vehicle. It meant that until a judge said otherwise, I did not have legal authority over my own money. He asked me for the car keys. He asked me for the checkbook. He asked me for the debit card. I would like to tell you I refused. I did not refuse. I have thought about why for 2 years, and the closest I can get is this. I spent 30 years in an institution. I know what a lawful order looks like. I know that the way you beat a piece of paper is not by tearing it up in front of the man delivering it. And underneath all of that, way down where I do not like to look, some part of me had been waiting my whole life to be told I did not get to decide anymore. And here it finally was, on my own kitchen table, in a font I recognized. I got the keys off the hook by the door. I got the checkbook out of the desk. I put them on the table. Then Vestal did the thing I still cannot get out of my head. He asked if he could get me a glass of water, and I said yes. So this man I had known 9 minutes went to my cabinet, and he had to open 2 before he found where I keep the glasses, and he filled it at my sink and set it down in front of me on a coaster he found himself. He was not performing. He genuinely believed he was in a house with a 66-year-old woman with a documented cognitive decline who had just been through something upsetting, and he was being decent about it. He believed the file. Of course he believed the file. It had been written by a licensed nurse and signed by a licensed physician and filed with a court. Roy Alden Vestal was not a bad man. He was proof that this whole thing does not require one. The accounts were joint. That is the part nobody thinks about. When they froze mine, they froze half of Wendell's. And my husband, who had never in 70 years been late on anything, spent that afternoon on the phone with the electric company. And Trevor stood in my kitchen doorway the entire time. 19 minutes. I know it was 19 minutes because I looked at the stove clock when Vestal came in and again when the door shut behind him. My son stood in the doorway of the kitchen he learned to walk in, hands in his pockets, and did not say one word. Not to me, not to Vestal, not when I said his name. I said it twice. The second time I said, Trevor, look at me. He looked at the floor. Gwendolyn Sartain took my case on the 31st. Elder law, Murfreesboro, 57 years old, talks fast, does not soften anything. Our first meeting lasted 2 hours, and she did not once tell me it was going to be okay. She could not be paid out of my accounts, so she did the fee agreement secured against the land, and Boyd sold his fishing boat for $4,200 to cover the retainer. He had that boat 9 years. He never once mentioned it again. Bridget told me about the sale 6 months later. At the second meeting, Gwen slid a single page across the table and asked if I recognized it. It was a return of service. I had been served, properly, lawfully, personally served with notice of the petition on the 14th of August at 2:40 in the afternoon. The 14th of August was my colonoscopy. I was in recovery. I had been under sedation 90 minutes before. There is a signature on that page, and it is my signature, wobbly and slanted, but mine, and I have no memory of any of it. I do not remember a person. I do not remember paper. Bethany drove me home that day. She had insisted. Trevor was working, and she said she did not want Wendell trying to load me into the truck by himself. I sat in Gwen's office and did the arithmetic. Served on August 14th. 21 days to respond. That window closed on September 4th. I found out about any of it on October 4th. I had lost by default a full month before I knew there was a fight. And Gwen told me the rest, and this is where I finally understood what kind of thing I was in. My silence for 21 days was already in their filings. They had put it in as evidence. A woman who receives a court summons and does nothing with it for 3 weeks. What does that tell the court about her capacity to manage her own affairs? They handed me a piece of paper while I was drugged, and then used the fact that I did not remember it as proof that I was losing my mind. I said to Gwen, "Who did they ask the court to put in charge of me?" She looked at the petition and said, "The petitioner requested that the respondent's son, Trevor Threadgill, be appointed conservator of the person and the estate." And I laughed out loud in that woman's office, and it came out ugly, because they had done all of it, every bit of it, the assessment and the visits and the doctor and the summons in the recovery room, and the court had looked at their paperwork and said, "This one clearly needs somebody appointed over her," and then appointed a stranger. They opened the door, and somebody else walked through it first. Vestal gave me the car back after 10 days. I want to be accurate about what that means, because it is not what it sounds like. The title was moved into his name as fiduciary. He restored my use of the vehicle at his discretion, in writing, subject to conditions, and one of those conditions was a monthly mileage report. So for 4 months I drove my own Buick, that I bought with my own money in 2017, and on the last day of every month I wrote the odometer reading on a form and mailed it to a man in an office park in Brentwood. 66 years old, reporting my mileage to a stranger like a teenager on a learner's permit. I did every bit of the driving I am about to tell you about with that form sitting in the glove box. 2 things came at me in November that I did not see coming, and both came from the direction I thought was safe. The first was a man named Wilson Teague. Gwen sat me down before he came and explained who he was. And I need to pass this along, because I have talked to a lot of women my age since, and not one of them knew it either. When somebody files to have you declared incapacitated, the court appoints a guardian ad litem. 60 years old, dark suit, soft voice, been doing it since the 90s. Every instinct in your body tells you that man is on your side. He is coming to your house. He is asking about your life. He is the one person in the whole apparatus who is there specifically because of you. He is not your lawyer. He does not represent you. He does not advocate for what you want. He is the eyes and ears of the court, and his job is to go look at you and go back and tell a judge what he saw. If what he sees is a woman who cannot take care of herself, that is what he writes. He is not on your side. He is not against you either. He is a camera with legs. Most people in my position never learn that. They find out afterward, if they find out at all. So I prepared. God help me, I prepared. I had the composition notebook. I had a 3-ring binder with 30 pages of source documents, tabbed and indexed. I had the credit card statements and the class roster and the church register. I had a written timeline. When Wilson Teague sat down at my kitchen table, I walked him through it in order, tab by tab, the way I would have walked a surveyor through a documentation deficiency in 2014. I was competent, I was organized, I was correct about every single fact. And 3 weeks later, his preliminary report described me as agitated and preoccupied with her own medical file. I read that sentence and had to put the page down. Preoccupied with her own medical file. There it was. The one skill I had, the 30 years, the only real weapon I owned in this whole thing. And a man came into my house, watched me use it, and wrote it down as a symptom. That is the trap, and I do not think people understand how tight it is. If you are calm, they say you are flat and unbothered, which is consistent with impairment. If you are upset, they say you are agitated. If you have documentation, they say you are fixated. If you do not have documentation, they say you cannot account for yourself. There is no way to be. The only correct behavior for a woman accused of losing her mind is to already have been believed. The second thing came 8 days later. A woman named Renata Gilliam, mid-40s, identification badge, Tennessee Department of Human Services, Adult Protective Services. She said she was required to follow up on a report, and she had to see a few things, and it would not take long. A report of self-neglect. Somebody had called the state of Tennessee and told them a 66-year-old woman out on this road was not feeding herself properly, was living in unsafe conditions, and was not managing her own medications. The referral had been made by a licensed healthcare professional, which under the law is a mandatory reporter, which means it goes to the top of the pile. I opened my refrigerator for a stranger. Sit with that. I stood in my own kitchen and held the door of my own refrigerator open so a woman with a clipboard could look inside it and write down what was in there. She looked at my pill organizer. She asked me to show her the bathroom. She asked if there was anybody who helped me with bathing. I answered every question. I did not cry until her car was out of the driveway, and then I sat down on the step off the carport and cried about 4 minutes, and then got up and went and wrote the time she arrived and the time she left in the composition notebook. Now here is what I did with November, and this is where 30 years finally started paying for itself. 14 visits, 14 dates. And for every single one, I went out and got something that did not come from me. That was the rule I set. Nothing in my own handwriting. Nothing I could have made up. Every piece of it had to exist somewhere else, created by somebody who had no idea any of this was happening, sitting in a file that had been there since, before anybody thought to lie about me. The continuing education class in Cookville on the 11th of July, with the sign-in sheet and my signature and 41 witnesses, and a certificate roster held by a professional association 62 miles away. A gas receipt with a timestamp from a station outside Smithville on the 19th of June, 1 hour and 10 minutes from my living room, at 11:40 in the morning, which is 30 minutes inside a window, when a nurse was documenting my vital signs at my kitchen table. The church register. We serve the second Sunday, Wendell and I, and it is a signed sheet in a binder in the office that goes back to 1994. The service recs on the Buick, which had the odometer written down at both ends of that summer, and which made certain distances physically impossible. And then the one that broke it open. Bridget supervises the 911 center for Rutherford County, and the emergency lines are not the only lines they record. The non-emergency administrative line is recorded too. Everybody who works there knows it. Nobody who does not work there ever thinks about it. On the 11th of July at 10:15 in the morning, I called my daughter on that line to ask whether she needed me to pick the kids up that afternoon, because I knew she had a schedule meeting. That call is on a county server, 10:15 in the morning. My voice, and you can hear road noise behind it, because I was on Interstate 40 going to Cookville. At 10:15 that morning, per the record, Bethany Threadgill was standing in my living room, performing a skilled nursing assessment. Bridget could not pull it herself, and she did not try. And I want that said out loud because that woman protected her job and her integrity through every bit of this. Gwen subpoenaed it through the county. It came back clean and time-stamped, and it was not ours. It was the county's. Gwen subpoenaed something else at the same time, and it turned out to be the spine of the whole case. The agency's own electronic system keeps an access log. Every login, every user, every device, every time somebody opens a chart. Nurses know it exists the way you know your car has a transmission. You do not think about it. Somewhere in there I made my second mistake. I decided Emmett Lockridge was in on it. It was the only thing that made sense to me. A doctor signs a certification for a woman he has never met, and every one of those visits is billed under his name. That is not carelessness. That is participation. I built the whole shape of it in my head over about 4 days, and by the end I was certain. Gwen told me not to go. I went. His office was in a strip building in Smyrna between an insurance agency and a nail salon. I sat in the waiting room 50 minutes, and when the girl called me back, I told her I was not there as a patient, and I needed 4 minutes with the doctor, and I would take them in the hallway if I had to. He gave me the 4 minutes. Emmett Lockridge was 63 years old, and he looked 70. Gray, heavy under the eyes, a coffee cup with a dried ring inside it sitting on a stack of folders. I put the plan of care on his desk. I put my hand flat on it. I asked him when he had examined me. He looked at it. He looked at his own signature, and he said, "Ma'am, I do not know who you are." I said, "That is my point." And he said, "No, I do not know who you are, and I sign about 300 of these a month." Then he sat down. He sat down slow, the way a man does when something lands on him, and he did not say anything for what felt like a long time. He picked the page up again and read the top of it. And he said, "There was supposed to be a face-to-face on this." I said, "There was." He said, "I know, there was supposed to be." That was the whole thing. He was not a criminal. He was a tired man in a bad building signing paper for money at the end of a career, 300 a month, and somebody put mine in the stack and he signed it and never knew my name until I was standing in front of him. Gwen deposed him the second week of December. He did not fight it. He answered everything. He said under oath that he had never met me, never examined me, and could not identify me in the room. I drove home from Smyrna that day and pulled over twice. That is the part I did not have a place to put. I had wanted a villain, and what I found was a man with a dirty coffee cup who had no idea what he had done to my life. Nobody has to be evil for this to happen to you. I keep telling people that, and nobody wants to hear it. There does not have to be a conspiracy. There just has to be one person willing to write it down, and then everybody else being ordinary. Which brings me to Delia Kirkendall. I hired Delia in 2008. I trained her. She was 29 and had a coding certificate and no confidence, and I sat with that girl 3 afternoons a week for a year. She is the privacy officer at that hospital now. I went to see her the 3rd week of November and asked her to pull the access history on my hospital chart. She said no. Not a soft no, a formal one. She told me she could not release access logs to a patient on request, that it was an internal investigative document, and that if I wanted to allege improper access, I would have to go through the process. And then she said, "You wrote the policy that says I cannot. In 2008, it is in a binder in my office with your initials on the cover. I will be honest about what I felt walking out of that building. I felt small. I had thought, without ever admitting it to myself, that my name still opened doors in there. 30 years, sheet cake, card everybody signed. Nobody in that lobby knew who I was. The girl at the desk asked me to spell Threadgill. I sat in the parking lot 20 minutes and then went back in. I did not beg. I have gone over what I said many times, and I think it is the best I did in the entire 2 years since. I said, "Delia, I am not asking you for the log. You are right, and I am not going to put you in that position. I am asking you to open a privacy complaint. That is a thing a patient is allowed to do and a thing you are required to act on. I am going to give you 4 dates. You are going to do what the policy says, and then I am going to walk out of your office and I am not going to call you at home." She got angry, really angry, red up the neck. She said, "You trained me to say no to people exactly like you are being right now." And I said, "Then say no, and then do your job." She stood there. Then she pulled a form out of a drawer and asked me for the dates. The compliance machine I built in 2008 started turning over. Slow. It took 6 weeks. But it turned, and it was the only thing in the state of Tennessee that year that worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Wendell and I had it out again the 2nd week of December. He wanted to settle. That is what he had been building up to since October, and it finally came out at the kitchen table. He said, "Give them the farm. Give them the whole 118 acres. Sign it over. Walk away. Keep the house and keep our name off a courthouse docket and keep the kids." I said I would not, and he said, "Corinne, we are 70 years old. What in the hell are we saving it for?" I did not have a good answer. I still do not have a good answer. I said something about my daddy and that 40 acres, and he let me say it, and then he said, "Your daddy is dead, and I am sitting right here." We did not resolve it. I am not going to tidy that up for you. Nobody won that argument. We went to bed with it still on the table, and it stayed there for the next 14 months. She came on the 12th of December to pick up some things of Joss's. We had changed the locks in November, the week after Vestal came, because Gwen made me. But I had left a spare under the concrete planter by the carport steps so Joss could get in after school when he rode his bike out, and Bethany had watched me put it there 2 summers before. I heard the carport door. Then she was in my kitchen with a duffel bag in her hand, and she stopped when she saw me standing at the counter. And I put myself in the doorway. I said, "You told them I could not manage my own medication. You wrote that down and you put your name under it." She did not put the bag down. I said, "Look at me, Bethany. You are standing in the kitchen where you got married. We moved the table out and put the arch right there by the window because it was raining. You told them I could not name the month. I want you to say it to my face. One time, out loud, the way you wrote it down." She did not blink. She has never been a woman who blinks. She said, "You were on the bathroom floor in February and you did not know where you were, and I am the one who found you." And I said, "Yes, that happened. That was one night. You turned one night into 14. She said my name. Not Mom. She had stopped calling me Mom somewhere in there, and I do not know when. She said, "Corinne, do you know what happened to my mother?" I said I knew her mother had dementia. She said, That is not what I asked. I asked if you know what happened to her. She had a urinary tract infection for 11 days, and nobody caught it, and she signed a reverse mortgage in that condition, and by the time any of us understood what was wrong with her, the house was gone. 2 years. 2 years of everybody in my family saying she is just getting older, she is just tired, do not embarrass her. Nobody wrote down one single thing about my mother. Not one note. And when we finally needed proof, there was nothing. Then she said the sentence I have not been able to get rid of. She said nobody wrote anything down for her. I wrote everything down for you. I stood there in my kitchen and understood something I did not want to understand, which is that this woman had not walked into my life to rob me. She had walked into it terrified. She had watched one old woman disappear inside a paper vacuum and decided that would never happen again on her watch. And for a while, at the beginning, she was probably the only person in this family paying attention. And then the solar money came down that county road, and she did not have to change what she was doing. She only had to keep doing it and let it mean something different. I said, you wrote down what you were afraid of. Then you made it true. Those are two different jobs, Bethany, and you did both of them. She looked at me a second. Then she picked up the duffel bag and walked out and closed the door behind her. Not a slam. She pulled it to and let the latch catch soft the way you do in a house where somebody is sleeping. I have thought about that door 100 times. A slam I could have used. A slam is a person losing control. She shut it like a nurse leaving a room. The agency access log came back through Gwen on the 6th of January. 14 logins under Bethany Threadgill's credentials, one for every documented visit, time-stamped, some from a workstation at the Smyrna office and some from her phone. 3 of those logins were entered from the office at hours when she had documented herself standing in my living room. She had been charting visits from her desk. That was what we expected. That was not what stopped my heart. The hospital notification letters went out the same week. That is what a breach investigation produces at the end. Formal letters certified to every individual whose protected health information was accessed without authorization. Wendell brought his in off the porch and stood there reading it with his glasses on the end of his nose, and he said, "Corinne, what is this?" And I sat down because I had not told him what I had asked Delia to look for. My husband's chart. Somebody had been in my husband's chart. And then about 40 minutes later, Odell Pridemore came walking up the driveway. 79 years old, in his good jacket, because he thought a certified letter meant you put on a jacket, holding the page out in front of him with both hands, the way you hold something you cannot read. He said, "Corinne, honey, I got this in the mail and I do not know what it is telling me. Does this mean I owe somebody?" I stood in my driveway with that old man and I could not make my mouth work. Delia's report came to Gwen on the 10th of January. Somebody had been getting into the hospital system under employee credentials belonging to Corinne Threadgill, Director of Health Information Management, retired June 2022. My login had never been deactivated, 2.5 years. I had been out of that building 2.5 years, and my access was still live. And here is exactly why, and it is the worst joke anybody ever played on me. The termination checklist for departing employees, the one that includes the line item for revoking systems access, was a process my department owned. My department, me, I built it in 2010. And when I walked out with my sheet cake, the person whose job it was to run that checklist on me was me, and nobody thought about it because everybody assumed the woman who wrote the policy had handled it. And the account had been reset. There was no theft. Somebody went in through the self-service password recovery and answered the security questions. Mother's maiden name, first pet, the street I grew up on. She knew all 3. She had heard me tell all 3 at kitchen tables and Thanksgiving dinners for 11 years. Nobody had to steal anything. That is what family is. Family is the answers to the questions. And that account had not just opened my chart. It opened Wendell's. And it opened the medical record of Odell Pridemore, 79 years old, our neighbor, whose 200 acres run along the west fence line of ours. I could not think why. And then Gwen said it. And it was so simple I was ashamed of myself for not seeing it in October. Utility scale solar does not want one farm, wants contiguous acreage. adjacent parcels assembled under one lease. Ours and Odell's together is 318 acres running unbroken to the county road. Odell has no children. He has a great nephew in Texas who will inherit that land and put it on the market inside a year. Somebody wanted to know how long that old man had left. They went into a 79-year-old man's chart to find out how sick he was. The hearing was the 21st of January in the Chancery Court, and the first thing you need to know is that they had already extended the temporary order once. 60 days ran out the 27th of December. Gwen had warned me. The petitioner filed for an extension pending hearing, and the court granted it, because of course it did. Because a court is not going to hand a woman back her checkbook 3 weeks before it decides whether she is competent to hold one. So Roy Alden Vestal had my accounts through Christmas. I will tell you about that Christmas in one sentence, and then move on. I made a ham with money my daughter gave me and put it on my own table, and everybody was very careful with me, and it was the worst day of my adult life. Chancellor Fay Hollingshead is 59 years old and has been on that bench a long time. She does not raise her voice. She has a way of taking her glasses off that makes attorneys stop talking. The room was not big. That surprised me. You picture something with high ceilings, and instead it is a room the size of a Sunday school class with bad carpet and a radiator that knocked all morning. My son sat at the petitioner's table with his wife and their attorney, 14 feet from me. I could see the back of his neck. I have known the back of that neck since it was 3 days old. Here is what they did to me first. Before any of the evidence, before Gwen said one word, the petitioner's attorney requested that the court take the respondent's testimony as to orientation. That is the language, as to orientation. And Hollingshead allowed it, and I sat in that chair and a lawyer in his 30s asked me what day of the week it was. I said Tuesday. He asked what the date was. I said the 21st of January, 2025. He asked who the president was. I said it. He asked where we were, and I said the Chancery Court of Rutherford County, Tennessee. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I got to 58, and he said, "Thank you, that is fine." I have thought about those 4 minutes more than any other 4 minutes of my life. I sat in a public room and answered questions a nurse asks a stroke patient out loud, with my son sitting 14 feet away with his hands folded, and there is no way to do it that does not humiliate you. If you get flustered, you are impaired. If you get sharp about it, you are hostile and impaired. If you answer smooth and quick, some part of the room decides you rehearsed. I was raised to be polite, so I was polite. I said, "Sir," and I answered every question, and I put my hands in my lap so nobody could see them. And I do not think I have ever hated anything as much as I hated my own good manners in that chair. Then Gwen stood up and put me back on the stand as a witness to my own record, and everything turned over. She did not ask me how I felt. She never once asked me how I felt about any of it, which is the smartest thing anybody did for me in 2 years. She asked what I did for 30 years. She had me lay out what a designated record set is, what an access log is, what documentation integrity means, and who is responsible for it. And then she put the plan of care up on the screen, and we went to work. 14 visits, 14 dates, and for everyone there was a document that came from somewhere else. The 11th of July. Nursing visit documented at 10 in the morning at my residence. Here is the sign-in sheet from a continuing education class in Cookeville, 62 miles away, with my signature on line 6 and 41 other signatures under it, held by a professional association that has no idea who any of these people are. And here is a recorded call on the Rutherford County Non-Emergency Administrative Line, 10:15 that morning, my voice with interstate noise behind it. The 19th of June. Here is a gas receipt time-stamped 11:40 in the morning at a station outside Smithville. The second Sundays. Here is the church service register, a bound book going back to 1994. The odometer readings off the Buick service records that make certain distances physically impossible in the time allowed. And on 14 times, and I watched the room change. There is a thing that happens in a hearing where people stop listening politely and start listening. You can feel it. The radiator knocked and nobody looked at it. Then Gwen put the agency access log on the screen. 14 logins. and 3 of them entered from a workstation in the Smyrna office at the same hour the visit note claimed she was in my living room. She had charted me from her desk. Then Gwen said, "Let us talk about the assessment itself." And this is the part that was mine. This is the part nobody else in that room could have done. And I will be honest, there was a piece of me that enjoyed it, and I am not sure that piece is very Christian. I said, "May I have page 4?" I said, "This document scores me as unable to manage my own medications independently. That is the finding it exists to support. That is the whole basis of the care plan." I said, "And on that same page, in the medication profile, is a drug I have never been prescribed in my life. And 2 drugs I have taken every morning for 9 years are not on it at all." I let that sit, I said. The document that says I cannot handle my medications cannot list my medications. Then I said, page 7. This assessment describes decreased range of motion, chronic pain, and an intervention plan for my left knee across 4 separate visits. And I stood up in the box, which you are not supposed to do, and nobody stopped me, and I put my hand on my right leg. I said, "I had this knee replaced in 2019. There is titanium in it. There is a scar on it you can see from where you are sitting. There is nothing wrong with my left knee, and there never has been." I said, "Nobody who was ever in a room with my legs could have written that page." Then we did the face-to-face. I explained it the way I explained it to student nurses for 20 years. For Medicare to pay for home health, a physician has to certify the need, and that certification is not valid unless the physician or an allowed practitioner actually saw the patient in person inside a specific window around the start of care, documented that encounter, and connected the reason for home health to what he found when he saw her. I said, "There is no encounter note in 140 pages." I said, "Dr. Lockridge testified under oath in December that he does not know me, not that he does not remember me, that he has never met me." I said, "Without that encounter, this certification was invalid from the first day. Not questionable, invalid. There was never a lawful episode of care. Everything built on top of it was built on nothing." Then Gwen entered the hospital breach report. She did it quietly, and she did it last, and it landed on that courtroom like a piece of furniture falling over. Retired employee credentials reactivated through security questions used to open 3 charts: mine, my husband's, and a 79-year-old neighbor with 200 acres on our west line who was not a party to anything and had never been anywhere near this family's business. Hollingshead put her glasses back on for that one. She asked Gwen 2 questions about Odell Pridemore, and she wrote something down. Then Gwen said no further questions. They called Bethany after lunch, and she did not lie. I had spent 3 months getting ready for her to lie. I had a whole shape in my head of how it would go, the small denials, the I do not recalls, the well, that is not exactly what happened. Gwen had prepared me for it. She said the most common thing is a fog. They do not deny, they blur. Bethany did not blur one single thing. She sat down and took the oath and said yes to almost every question anybody asked her. Yes, she opened the episode of care. Yes, she performed the assessment. Yes, she documented visits that did not occur. Asked how many, she said. 4 of them were real and 10 were not, which was more precise than anything we had been able to prove. Her own attorney looked like he had been hit in the mouth. And then they asked her why. And she turned in the chair and talked to the judge like there was nobody else in the room. She talked about her mother. 11 days with an untreated infection and a reverse mortgage signed at a kitchen table in that condition. And 2 years of a family telling each other she is just getting older. She is just tired. Do not embarrass her in front of people. And when they finally understood, there was no record anywhere. Not one note. Nothing to fight with. The house was gone, and there was no piece of paper in the world that said her mother had been sick when she signed. She said, "I told myself I would never let a family get caught with nothing again." And then she said the thing I think about at 4 in the morning. She said, "I wrote down the thing I was scared of, and then I helped it come true." She said, "I know there is a difference between those 2. I am not going to sit up here and act like I do not." Nobody said anything for a second. That is not a confession that helps you. Her lawyer knew it. It sank her. But she said it anyway, and I have never been able to decide what that means about her, and I have stopped trying. Then they called my son. Trevor took the stand in a suit I had not seen before, and he did not look at me, and his attorney walked him through the family history the way you would walk somebody through a garden. And Trevor told the truth. I need to be careful here because this is the center of the whole thing. He did not lie about me. He did not accuse me of anything that was not so. Every word out of my son's mouth that afternoon was accurate, and it was accurate because he was reciting my life. He said his mother had always taken care of things. He was asked to be specific, and he was specific. He said, in 2004, I was 18, and there was money missing from a fire department fundraiser, and my mother put it back and told the treasurer she had miscounted. He said, in 2013, I had a problem with a customer deposit in my business, and my mother took $9,400 out of her retirement account and gave it to me and told my father they were re-roofing a shed. He said, in 2019, I got a DUI, and my mother called a man off the hospital board to see what he could do about it. He said she gave me money she did not have repeatedly, over about 20 years. And then his attorney asked him what he had told his wife about his mother's judgment. And Trevor said, I told her my mother always says yes. He said it flat. He was not being cruel. That is what makes it unbearable. My son sat under oath and told a courtroom the actual truth about how I had loved him, and he could not hear that it was an indictment. And their attorney stood up and turned to the bench and made the argument they had been building the whole time. He said, Your Honor, the respondent has presented herself today as a meticulous professional. The court has seen that. What the court has also heard is 20 years of financial decisions that no competent person would make. Retirement funds liquidated, restitution paid in secret, assets moved without her husband's knowledge. This is not a woman exercising independent financial judgment. This is a pattern, and it predates every document in evidence, and interrupting exactly this kind of pattern is what a conservatorship exists to do. I sat there with my hands in my lap, 40 years, every bank envelope, every phone call, every lie I told my husband to keep my son comfortable. I had done all of it out of love, and I had done it in secret, and now it was being read into a public record as evidence that I could not be trusted with my own money. And the worst part, the part I have not been able to put down in 2 years, is that the man was not entirely wrong. Not about the medical file. That was manufactured, and everybody in the room knew it by 2 in the afternoon. But about the pattern, about a woman who takes $9,400 out of a retirement account and lies to her husband of 32 years about a shed roof. He had a point. He had my whole life, and he had a point. Chancellor Hollingshead denied the petition on the 4th of February. She wrote that the medical documentation submitted in support was unreliable and in material respects fabricated, that the certifying physician had never examined the respondent, and that the court was referring the matter regarding the medical record of a third party, one Odell Pridemore, who was not before the court and had no representation in the proceeding, to the district attorney and to the Department of Human Services for whatever action they deemed appropriate. And then she wrote a sentence Gwen read out loud to me in her office, and that I asked her to read again. The court notes that the respondent rebutted this evidence through 14 independent contemporaneous records which she located, organized, and authenticated herself, drawing on 30 years of professional experience in health information management. The court further notes that a respondent without that specific expertise would in all likelihood have been unable to do so. Gwen put the page down and said, "That's her telling the world something." I said, "I know what she is telling the world." I won because I happened to be the one woman in Rutherford County who knew what an access log was. The system did not catch anything. The system delivered a summons to a sedated woman in a recovery room and then held her silence against her. I did not walk out of there feeling protected. I walked out doing arithmetic about every other woman my age in that county who would have lost. I am going to tell you how it all came out, and I am going to tell you plain, because I have watched enough of these stories get tied up at the end with a bow, and I am not going to do that to you. Bethany was indicted in April of 2025. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and falsification of healthcare records. The Board of Nursing suspended her license inside 6 weeks, and that part happened fast because a licensing board does not need a jury. The criminal case took 14 months, and in June of 2026, she pled to a reduced charge. Judicial diversion, probation, restitution, community service hours, and if she completes it clean, the whole thing comes off her record like it never happened. She did not spend one night in jail. I sat in that courtroom and listened to the reasons. No prior record, 2 children, cooperative from the beginning, which was true. She never once fought it. Full admission. Letters from 3 former patients about what a good nurse she had been, and I have no doubt those letters were honest. I am not going to stand here and tell you I made my peace with that. I did not. I have not. People want me to say something wise about mercy, and I do not have it in me. A woman wrote down that my mind was gone, filed it in a court, put a stranger in my kitchen with my car keys, and she is going to be able to say truthfully in 3 years that she has never been convicted of anything. That is what happened. I do not have a lesson attached to it. Trevor pled to a misdemeanor in January of this year. He lost his contractor's license. The excavating company went under anyway, 4 months later, and it would have gone under whether any of this had happened or not, which is a thing I think about. Emmett Lockridge got an administrative action from the Board of Medical Examiners, a reprimand, remedial coursework, and a period of monitoring. He sent me a letter that November. 2 sentences. I read it standing at the mailbox and put it in the drawer with the Medicare notices and never answered it, and I do not know if that was right. Renata Gilliam closed the self-neglect referral as unsubstantiated in February. Then she opened a new one going the other direction, and her report was part of what went to the district attorney. She drove out to the house to tell me herself instead of mailing it. And she sat at my table and drank a cup of coffee and told me she had been doing that job for 19 years and had never once seen a family use a chart as the weapon. She said usually they just take the checkbook. The referral on Odell's chart went to the district attorney in the spring, and it is still open. 2.5 years. Nobody has told me anything, and I have stopped asking. Because Odell never understood the letter. He asked me twice more that winter if it meant he owed somebody money, and both times I told him, no, sir, it is nothing. Do not you worry about that. He passed the following January, pneumonia in the hospital in McMinnville, and it had nothing to do with any of this. The great-nephew came from Texas and had the land listed inside 5 months. There are survey stakes along the west line now with orange tape on them and a strip cleared where the access road is going to run. I can see it from my kitchen window. That old man left cucumbers on my porch every July for 40 years, and somebody read his medical chart to find out how long he had left, and he went into the ground never knowing it. I could not make it right. I could not even explain it to him. That one does not close, and I am not going to pretend it does. Trevor called me in March before his sentencing. He wanted a letter for the judge, a character letter from his mother. Understand what that was. It was not a small ask, and it was not a strange one. That is the most ordinary thing in the world. Mothers write those letters every day in every county in this country, and there is nothing wrong with it. But it was the same thing. It was the exact same thing it had been in 2004 in a bank parking lot, and in 2013 with the retirement account, and in 2019 on the phone with Doyle Ferreter. My son had come to the end of a road and turned around and looked for me, because I had always been standing there. 40 years I had been standing there, I said. If they call me, I will tell them the truth about you. All of it. The good parts, too. And there are good parts, I will say them. I said, but I am not writing you a story. You have had enough of those from me. He did not say anything for a long time. Long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, okay, Mama, and he hung up. He called again that Sunday. And the Sunday after that, the calls are short now. They are careful. We talk about the kids and the weather and whether I have had the gutters done. There is a lot we do not touch. But I will tell you something I did not expect, which is that they are honest. 10 minutes of true, careful talk with my son on a Sunday is more than I had from him in the 20 years I was buying him out of things. I do not know what to call that. It is not a happy ending. It is just what is there. Hattie is 11 now. She has never once mentioned the room with the slanty ceiling, not to me, not in 2.5 years. I do not know whether she remembers saying it. I am not going to be the one to ask her. Joss is 15. He was in my kitchen in April, doing homework at the counter the way he does. And he did not look up, and he said, "Grandma, when somebody writes down that you are sick and you are not, does it come back out after?" I said, "What do you mean, honey?" He said, "Like, does somebody go in and take it out when they find out it was wrong? Is there a guy whose job that is?" And I had to tell that boy the truth because he's old enough and because he would have found out anyway. I said, "No, there is not a guy." I said, "They can add to it. They can put a note beside it, but nothing comes out. The record keeps everything, baby. That is what it is for." He thought about it. Then he said, "That seems like a bad system." I said, "It is the only one we have got." He said, "That is not the same as it being good. 15 years old, the money, 2 years of legal fees, expert witness fees, the forensic documentation consultant, the criminal matter running alongside, the amendment fight afterward. $142,000. We sold the 40 acres on the roadside. We did not need the whole 40. But that was the only piece with enough road frontage to subdivide legally, and you cannot sell half of a parcel that has no way in and out of it. That was my father's 40. He cleared it himself in 1968 with a chainsaw and a mule he borrowed from Hollis Renfro, and it took him 2 summers. The money left over after Gwen and the experts went into a long-term care fund. It is in Wendell's name. We kept the house and we kept the ridge. So I suppose we won. I have a hard time saying that sentence out loud. Now here is the part I really need to tell you, because this is what is different from what you think happens at the end of a story like this. I filed a request for amendment of my medical record. That is your right. When something in your chart is wrong, you can ask the provider to fix it. They granted it in part. The 14 fabricated visits came out. The assessment was pulled. The plan of care was voided. Everything that woman wrote about me is gone out of that file, and there is a notation explaining why. But the emergency department note from the 9th of February, 2024 stayed. It stayed because it is accurate. I was confused that night. I was on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, and I did not know where I was. And a nurse wrote down altered mental status because that is what she was looking at. That note is correct. There are no grounds to amend a correct note. I know that better than anybody alive because I am the one who used to deny those requests. So what I got instead is what the law gives you when they will not change it. A statement of disagreement. It is a document you write, and they are required to attach it to the record, and it travels with the file from now on. Anybody who pulls my chart sees the note, and then they see mine. Mine is 410 words. It took me 11 days to write. It explains what happened on the 9th of February and what was built on top of it afterward, and what a court found in 2025. That is what I get, a rebuttal stapled to the thing forever. Every doctor I see for the rest of my life is going to read that they suspected my mind was going, and then read my explanation of why they were wrong. In that order. Always in that order. They read the accusation first. They always will. I keep a copy of it folded in quarters in my wallet. Not in the file cabinet, in my wallet, behind the insurance card where I can put my hand on it. I do not know what I think I am going to do with it. Hand it to somebody. I keep it there anyway. This past June, on a Thursday evening, Wendell and I were out on the back porch, watching the light come down on the ridge, which is the thing I told you I could never describe. He is 71 now. Twice last month he called Bridget by his sister's name. Both times he caught it himself a second later and laughed and said something about getting old. And I laughed too, and neither of us said anything else about it. He was quiet a long while, then he said, "Corinne." I said, "What?" He said, "Do you reckon I ought to write one of them things?" "One of your statements." I said, "Write one about what?" And he said, "I do not know yet, ahead of time, just to have it, in case somebody says something about me someday, and I am not in any shape to say different." And I sat there on my own porch, on my own land, next to a man I have been married to for 45 years, and I could not answer him. I still have not answered him. I spent 30 years making sure that what got written down about a person was true. It never once occurred to me to wonder who would be writing about me. People ask if I forgave my son. I do not have a good answer for that. I know I stopped paying for him. Those are two different things, and I am not going to stand here and pretend they are the same. What I think about is the 9th of February. I really was confused that night. That part is real, and it stays in my chart until I die. She did not make me up. She found one true thing and she grew it. That is what keeps me awake, not the lie, the seed. She knew the answers to my security questions because she was family. That is the whole story, if you want it short.